on my word. Remember, no new information from this chapter. We're done in chapter 11 except for our test review. I haven't told you guys yet. I've already told Algebra 1. But the way we're doing our test, there's going to be a variance in the way we've done the review for them now compared to what we did before, and also a benefit in the way that we take them. Okay, the way that it's going to be different is we don't really go through and solve all or even many of the problems. In fact, we're not going to do that, guys, with a single one of the problems on the test. Here's the reason for that. I'd like to do a more thorough review, and it's because you guys' tests are hard, whether it's math or English. We try to make the Bible test a little bit easier. And Miss Nicole, she's told me that too, and so she kind of alters her tests a little bit more than what I do. But I also accommodate and give you guys, pretty good curve a lot of times, or make, 5 of them bonus and things like that. Well, the reason we're not going to go through each one is because if there's a recording of that, and then you go back and take your test, you could just watch the recording and just write down the math that I did on the board. Well, I thought about deleting the video after you had watched it, but then you could also have notes. And I'm not saying any of you would, but I'm just not there to watch like I am in class to make sure that doesn't happen, that it's not just copied straight off of something, and that you're actually still doing the work. So I'm sorry we can't do that. However, I'm still going to give you a whole bunch of helps, and I'm going to do that here in just a minute. But before we do get to that, I also want to mention you have a real benefit that typically you don't have. You get to use your notes on the test. And I've been telling you that. That's been advertised all along so you could know and be preparing for that. And I hope you adequately have, because you can use your test. I do ask that you don't use your books. Please don't use your books, but you can use your notes. And please take the test out if you don't have it out already. Take out your Chapter 11 pre-algebra test. And what I want you to do, if you want, and it would help you, is to actually write down on the test itself. I'm fine with that. Or in your notes. I'd probably do it on the test. If I were you, it would be more readily accessible. But write down these helps that I give you guys. And so we're just going to open the test and get right to it. Alright, so how about number 1? And you'll see what I'm saying. We're not going to work through the problems like we usually do. However, these are going to be some real helps. Number 1 on the test is find the 2 consecutive integers between which the square root of 55 falls. Okay, find 2 consecutive integers between which the square root of 55 falls. Now, don't get confused by square root and cube roots. Remember, if there's no number around where that v is, it's understood to be a square root. If there is the number 3, it's understood to be a cube root. And later in your guys' math careers, you'll deal more with even larger roots than that, but for right now, that's all about which we need to be concerned. So this is square root because there's no number at the top of that v, and 55 is not a perfect square root, but the way you find the 2 numbers between which the square root of 55 falls is you use 2 perfect squares. And guys, the 2 perfect squares you need to use, this is a huge Mongo hint to you, so make sure you write these down, is the square root of 49 and the square root of 64. It's going to be between those 2. Now listen to me, that's not the answer. You have to simplify what the square root of 49 is. In other words, what times itself gets you to 49, and over here, what times itself gets you to 64. That will give you the 2 whole numbers, okay, with the square root symbol no longer there once you simplify, but that will give you the 2 numbers between which the square root of 55 falls. Not all the hints on the test are going to be that strong where I all but give you the answer, but I'll do that for 1 or 2, maybe even a few of them. Number 2, which of the following are not real? Which of the following are not real? The square root of -9, negative times, which essentially that's the same thing as there's an invisible 1, a -1 times the square root of 9, the square root of -27, the square root of 27, and notice here the cubed root, because that 3 is above the v, of what's understood to be a -1 times the cubed root of 27, and then the cubed root of -27. will ask you to remember something really important. And here's something I want to tell you. There are 2 answers on this one. So 2 of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2 of those 6 are going to be in the blank to your left if you've done it correctly at the end. Here's the strong hint that I'm going to give you. You can have a positive cubed root number as the radicand. You can have a negative cube, okay, with a 3 above the V, cubed root also of a negative number. That's okay, negative radicand. However, in a square root, while you can have the negative sign outside of the square root symbol, you cannot have it inside because there's no number, even a negative, times itself that's going to equal a negative number because 2 negatives make a positive. So if there's a negative sign that's attached to a number underneath the square root, not cube root, but square root symbol, it cannot be a real number. And there are 2 of those in number 2. Number 3. We are going to do some estimation. We're actually going to do that in 3 and 4. But notice in 3, we need to estimate not the square, but the cube root of 29 to the nearest integer. In other words, whole number. Okay? And I've all but told you the answer on this one. It's either going to be the number 3 or the number 4. So if you have no clue what you're doing, flip a coin. You've got a 50% chance of getting it right. But the way that you do it, you just ask yourself, what number times itself times itself? Okay, so it's the number, and then you multiply it by itself 2 other times for a total of 3 times that term appears. What number times itself is the cubed root. Gets you to what that cubed root number was. In this case, it's not going to be a perfect cube, but it's going to be nearest it. Is the number 3 times itself? 3 times 3 times 3? Does that get you closer to the cubed root of 29 than what does the next number up? 4 times 4 times 4. Do the math and you tell me. It's going to be 3 or it's going to be 4. On number 4, you are to place, notice not the cubed root, but the square root, don't get thrown off by that, of 11 to the nearest 10th. Okay? To the nearest 10th. And I've given you all but the answer. It's either going to be 3.3 or it's going to be 3.4. Okay? I'll let you guys remember on this test, if you want, you can use your calculator. But there are going to be times that if you use a calculator, even though technically your answer is correct, unless in an instance like this, when you're told to round to the nearest decimal, outside of that, you need to leave it in proper square root form, proper radical form. And if you do that, there will be a number of these that will still have a radical or a square root with a number under it, even as your answer. So what number times itself, excuse me, what number, allergies are kicking up here, guys. Those trees are really blossoming out. So, right here, number 4. What number times itself? 3 times 3, or I'm sorry, 3.3 times 3.3, or 3.4 times 3.4 that gets me just ever so slightly closer to the number 11 as in taking the square root of it. Number 5. We need to simplify. And here's what I did on this. Write this down, guys. It'll tell you what your answer is going to look like in the end. And follow your notes and study your notes before you even get to where you take your test. And by the way, I didn't tell you this, but obviously it's Thursday, right? And we're doing our test review. Guys, if it's fresher in your minds, you know how I don't like to set up taking a test on Monday? The only issue is we've just had so much time away from weather and sickness that we just don't have any more single days to burn. And so I just kind of had to set it up that way because it's the way it fell and I didn't want to try to rearrange it. You don't have to take your test until Monday. I would encourage you to be an overachiever and either today or at the latest, possibly even tomorrow on your day off. I know that's terrible. I'd probably do it maybe today, consider. After we do this review, just go ahead and take your test, possibly while it's really fresh in your mind. And I'm giving you Monday, though, as a time where you can take it if you want. But if you get it done today or tomorrow, you don't have any math for Monday. But again, you can put it off to then because I do want to supply class time, but I want you to know that you really don't have to wait if it would benefit you to go ahead and take it now. So here's what these are going to look. Whenever you find the square root of 64 of number 5, you're going to end up, this means, with a positive whole number. Okay, it'll be like, for instance, like the number 14. Now that's not the answer. But when you get done, it'll be something like that. It's a positive number and it's a whole number. It's not a fraction, not a decimal. That's what I mean by plus whole in the number sign. Number 6, when you take the square root of 14,400 and using the rules, breaking them down into products of what so happens to be two perfect squares, you're going to end up with a positive whole number. On number 7, now this is one I don't want you to be tricked by this. It's not the square root, but the cubed root on number 7. Remember, you can write this down on your test for helps. You can write it in your notes, wherever you prefer. You don't have to write it down at all, but man, you're going to miss out on a lot of aid if you don't. The cubed root on number 7, not the square root, of negative 1,000, which is what times itself times itself. And so you have that number 3 times, not just 2. Not what times itself, but what times itself times itself, because it's the cubed root, gets you to negative 1,000. That's going to be a negative whole number. On number 8, it's going to be different than most of the others. Okay, number 8, you're going to have some number, a square root sign, and then some number there whenever you get done simplifying it. And that's on number 8, square root of 294. Number 9, when you try to find the square root of 112 over 63, 112 over 63, you will end up with a positive fraction, no square root sign left. A positive fraction, not a very big one either. On number 10, the square root of 2 to the 6th power times 5 squared over 3 to the 4th power. You're going to end up with a positive fraction on number 10. Okay, a positive fraction. And actually, as a heads up on 9 and 10, you could end up with a mixed number, meaning a whole number and then a fraction. But you can leave it in improper fraction form, numbers 9 and 10 if you prefer. I'm good with that. Number 11. Number 11. You're going to end up with a positive whole number. Okay, a positive whole number. Number 12, you will have a positive number on number 12. Okay, and hold on just a second here. I've written that incorrectly. Let me fix that. Sorry about that. Between 14 of them, you're bound to put one up here incorrectly when you're doing some obscure terminology. So number 12, you're going to have, it's going to be like number 8 right up here. On number 12, sorry about that, guys. Making progress, right? We're making mistakes. You're going to have a number, square root symbol, and then you're going to have another number underneath that square root sign. And that's in simplified form. Don't give me a whole number, but with a decimal. Even though if it technically it's correct, I will mark it wrong. Okay? Because it's not written in standard form. Number 13 is going to be just like it, in that you're going to have a number and then the square root of a number that's found underneath it. Just do all your simplification, guys. Do all your simplification, all your math. Take some square roots at the appropriate times based on your notes and the instruction we've had and work you've done in your homework, and you'll be fine. Number 14. And number 14, you're going to end up with a positive whole number. In other words, there's no square root symbol that's going to be left. Okay, so that's a slight rundown of numbers 1 through 14. I'm going to pause. Okay, I'm going to pause and I'm going to erase this, and then I'm going to give you some helpful hints on numbers 15 through 25. Guys, again, I want to tell you, I know this is not an easy test. It's very difficult, to be very honest with you. As brilliant as you all are, this is above your pay grade, meaning this instruction really is more than early for where you are right now, but it's going to pay off dividends in the end, number 1. And number 2 is this. Don't think for half a second that I'm going to hold you to the same standard that I would Algebra 1 whenever I teach this to them at their level. even though it's a little higher one, but at their level in the next chapter. Okay, I'm going to grade with that understanding in mind. All that I ask is that you give me 110%. You give me everything that you have and a little bit more, and I promise you, you will be rewarded for it. Okay, I'm going to pause, I'm going to erase this, and then we'll pick back up. I'm back! Hey guys, let's finish up. Numbers 15 through 25 shouldn't take a whole lot of time, but I do want to just give you guys some pointers that would continue to maybe keep you on the right track on these. Again, pretty difficult test, but I know you'll do well. Number 15. Okay, number 15, you have the square root of x equals 1.5. Well, I need to solve for x. So guys, all I do is apply the opposite of the square root to get rid of that on the left side. What's the opposite of a square root symbol? It's to square something. Remember, the opposite of a square is a square root, so the opposite of a square root has to be a square. It's correlative with something like addition and subtraction with multiplication and division. Those are the opposites of one another and in both directions. So also the square root and squaring something are the opposites of one another. So all that I do is square the side with x on number 15. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I have to square 1.5. Remember guys, you can use your calculators. So go ahead and punch in 1.5 times 1.5. I've all but given you the answer on that one, so there's no reason not to come up with the right answer, which will be a positive whole number, and there will be a decimal. Okay, and it may come out evenly to two places. If it doesn't, leave it at two places, the hundredth spot. Number 16, the square root of 3x equals 9. Take the side with the 3x under the square root symbol and square that whole side, but also you have to square the other side. So you'll end up with 3x equals 9 times 9, figure out what that is, and then finish by doing whatever you need to with that 3 on the left side, which will cause you to do it on the right side also. Okay? Now, on number 17, I'll have you know that's unique. And that's all I'm going to say. You might refer back up to the instructions on that section. That'll tell you all that you need to know. That is a unique one, number 17 in this section. Number 18. Number 18. The first thing is, technically it's kind of not, but it basically is. You treat it like a two-step equation. Everything you know is wrong. That 7's being added to the left side. How do you move it to the right side? And once you simplify with that, involving that number and whatever mathematical sign you need to do on the right side as you did on the left, then you have a 3 being multiplied to that square root of x. How do you detach a 3 if it's being multiplied on the left side and move it to the right? And then, once you've done that to both sides, you have the square root of x equals some number. How do you rid yourself of the square roots? The opposite, which is to square it. So square both sides, and that's going to give you your answer. And what are we on? Number 18? That's going to be not only a positive whole number, but I'll tell you it'll be a sizable positive whole number. On number 19, remember what you're going to be doing is the opposite of what we've been doing in squaring. After you detach that 2 that's attached to the x squared, it's being multiplied to it, so how do you get that 2 to the other side? You'll be left with x squared equals, after you apply the operation, some number. And guys, the way to get rid of a squared is to do the opposite. Take the square root of that side, but when you do it to the left side, you have to do it to the right side also. And remember, when you take the square root of a number, this is true not only of 19, but also number 20, you have to consider plus and minus. Okay? There are two possible answers. When you apply the square root yourself, forcibly so, because a positive times a positive would be a positive, but also a negative times a negative would be a positive. So both the positive of that number and the negative of that number can be equally true when you apply or you force into the equation, because you have to solve it, the square root. So that's the same thing on number 20. You treat it like a two-step equation. Everything you know is wrong on 20. do the plus 25, take care of that first by however you need to move it to the other side, and then take care of that 2 after you do so that's attached to that x squared, okay, by multiplication, do the opposite process of that, and then you're going to be left with x squared equals some number, and the way you get rid of that squared is the opposite mathematical process, which is taking the square root of both sides. And whenever you do that, your answer is going to be a plus or a minus number. It's going to be similar in number 21. The only thing is, on 21 you have in parentheses 4x minus 3 squared. And so before you can do anything, you can't just say, well, I'm going to add that 3. No, you can't. It's inside of a parentheses. And so the first thing you have to do is get rid of that parentheses. What's keeping that parentheses in place is that squared. And so you have to take the square root of the entire side with the 4x minus 3, which is just going to drop your squared. That's why you did it. But then you have to take the square root of 49 on the right side, because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And whatever number that whatever number that simplifies the square root of 49, that's going to be a plus or a minus from that point. And so you have to solve that equation with that positive number, which is the square root of 49, first, and then you'll go back and resolve the 4x minus 3 equals whatever that number is, the square root of 49. This time, though, it's a negative of that number, and solve it a second time. And so in number 21, you will end up with 2 answers on that basis. And the way you answer it is x equals some number, or it equals this number. Okay, but there will be 2 possible answers on that one. Number 22, find the length of the hypotenuse. Hard to say, much tougher to spell. That's actually not that bad to say or spell, but it's a funny word anyway. Hippopotamus. Find the length of the hypotenuse of a right triangle to the nearest tenth if both legs have a length of 6. How do I do that? On 22 and 23, I use my handy dandy formula, the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so in other words, in setting that up for the first one, both legs have a length of 6. Well, the legs are your A's and your B's. Remember, the C is your hypotenuse, and that's always the longest of all that are being considered. And the reason for that is it's this one squared plus this one squared all by itself. In other words, it equals the combination of those 2 squared. That's why it's always the longest. So your first one's going to look like this. Both legs have a length of 6, so your equation is going to be 6 squared plus 6 squared equals c squared. Okay, simplify what 6 squared is, add them together, and then take the square root of both sides to be able to solve for c, which is your hypotenuse. Okay, you're going to do that on number 22. You're going to do that as well on number 23. The only difference is here, you can do it for A or B, doesn't make any difference. But notice your hypotenuse is given to you as 25. So you're going to plug in for your C value, 25, and then squared. And I know these are big numbers, but remember you can use your calculator on this test, so that's going to help you. But you're going to be solving either for A or B, and it doesn't matter which one because they're being added, so it's not going to come out to a different answer either way. Number 24, show whether a triangle having sides with lengths of 8, 12, and 15 is or is not a right triangle. Now look, you've been given all 3 values. You're still using, I didn't put it on here, but you're still using this same formula for number 24. And so what you're going to do is remember the longest side is always your hypotenuse. And so your 15 is going to go here. You're going to put 15 squared for C, and use your calculator for that if you need to. And you're going to put 8 squared for A and 12 squared for B. And so all you do is you'll come up with a number on this side, and you'll also come up with a number on this side, just punching in the numbers and doing I wouldn't say basic math, but doing math, and do those numbers equal each other? If they do, the answer is yes. That's a right triangle. If the answers do not equal each other, they're different numbers, then no, it is not a right triangle. And finally, numero 25, correct? Cierto? All right, 25. A man wants to make a tent by tossing a 20-foot long tarp over a tree branch that is 6 feet above the ground, so that 10 feet of the tarp is on each side. Determine the width of the base of the tent. You know how these are, especially the last questions, whether it's quizzes or tests. They make them really hard, and so I'm going to make it a little simpler, and I'm going to tell you the formula that you need to use based on those numbers is this. S squared plus 6 squared equals 10 squared. And really, once again, we're just using the Pythagorean theorem. But I'm going to turn my eraser here. We're just using a different variable. And the reason for that is it wants you to determine side, and so we call it S instead of A or B, but it's the same concept. So S squared plus, that's not 5 squared, okay? That's S, that's your variable. S squared plus 6 squared equals 10 squared. Do your math and simplification here. Move this number to the other side. Take the square root on both sides to get rid of that squared. And then you'll have your answer. Okay guys, that's all that I have. I didn't tell you, and I failed to, I apologize for that. I did, however, list it in the posting on Facebook, and it's also still on your syllabus. And check that periodically, that can still be helpful too. I try to mention everything that's on there. If I ever do forget something, I try to have it put on Facebook, but if it's in the syllabus, and if it's not, that's on me, but if it's in the syllabus, your assignments, that's on you to be aware of those, and I try to give out reminders as much as I can. But your quiz 3, it was assigned yesterday, and that means it's going to be due on test day, but I would encourage you, and again, you can take your test today if you want, but I would encourage you, especially if you don't, get that done as soon as you can, get that turned in to me. I grade it, get it back to you, and so you can use your quizzes along with your homework on your test, and I know that would be quite advantageous to you. Okay guys, we'll go knock them dead. I know that you can do it, and I just ask this, give me 110%, and I'll love you forever and always. Actually, I still would anyway, but I'll like you even more if you do that. So please, if nothing else, do it for me, okay? But also, and really even more importantly, do it for yourself. Give it everything you have. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.